In a quiet little town where life usually moved at a slow and predictable pace, an event unfolded that would shake the community to its core. The local courthouse, a place people often associated with mundane legal matters like traffic violations or small claims disputes, became the center of attention on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday morning. Inside, rows of wooden benches stretched across the room, filled with families, lawyers, and curious onlookers waiting for their cases to be called. Among them sat Maya Johnson, a bright and confident 16-year-old who had never imagined herself in such a setting. She wasn't there because she was in trouble, far from it. Instead, she had been asked to testify as a witness in a minor case involving her neighbor, Mr. Thompson, who was accused of accidentally damaging someone's fence during a heated argument. Maya had seen the whole thing unfold from her bedroom window, and now her parents had encouraged her to do her civic duty by speaking up about what she witnessed. Maya felt nervous but tried to keep calm. She clutched her notebook tightly, flipping through pages filled with doodles and notes she'd jotted down while preparing for today. Her mother had told her earlier that morning, "Just tell the truth, sweetheart. That's all they need." So, Maya reminded herself to stay composed and focused. But as the minutes ticked by and names were called one after another, something began to feel off. The mood shifted when Officer Greg Hargrove entered the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with an air of authority that made heads turn. Everyone knew him, or at least his reputation. Over the years, he'd become infamous for his short temper and heavy-handed approach to enforcing rules. Some whispered stories about how he once tackled a teenager over a parking ticket. Others recalled how he shouted at elderly citizens simply for asking questions. To many, including Maya, he represented everything wrong with the system. A man who wielded power recklessly and without accountability. As the session continued, Maya noticed how Hargrove paced back and forth near the front of the courtroom, glaring at anyone who dared make even the slightest noise. His presence created an uneasy atmosphere, making some squirm uncomfortably in their seats. When her name was finally called, Maya stood up hesitantly, clutching her notebook closer to her chest. As she walked toward the witness stand, she couldn't help but glance at her family seated nearby. They gave her reassuring smiles, though worry flickered in their eyes. But before Maya could reach the stand, Hargrove stepped into her path. "Where do you think you're going?" he barked, his voice sharp enough to startle everyone in the room. Maya froze, unsure how to respond. I'm just going to sit closer to my mom," she stammered, pointing toward the bench where her family sat. She thought maybe sitting near them would ease her nerves. Hargrove's expression darkened. "You'll sit where you're told," he snapped, towering over her. Before Maya could protest, he grabbed her arm roughly and pulled her aside. People gasped audibly as they watched the scene unfold. Maya struggled to pull away, her heart pounding in her chest. "Let go of me," she cried, tears welling up in her eyes. But Hargrove didn't listen. Instead, he reached for his handcuffs and locked them around her wrists, ignoring her pleas and protests. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Spectators exchanged horrified looks, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. A few brave souls stood up, shouting objections, but Hargrove ignored them, dragging Maya out of the room as if she were some dangerous criminal. Outside, under the fluorescent lights of the hallway, Maya collapsed onto a bench, trembling and humiliated. Her mind raced with questions. Why was this happening? What had she done wrong? All she wanted was to go home. Word of the incident spread quickly. Someone in the courtroom had recorded the entire ordeal on their phone, capturing every agonizing moment. Within hours, the video went viral online, sparking outrage far beyond the confines of the small town. Social media platforms lit up with hashtags like "Justice for Maya" and "Enough is enough." Viewers were appalled by what they saw. A young girl being treated like a threat simply because she asked to sit closer to her family. Comment sections overflowed with messages of support for Maya, alongside fierce criticism of Hargrove and the police department. Local news outlets picked up the story, amplifying the growing demand for answers. Protesters gathered outside the Courthouse holding signs that read "Protect Our Children" and "Accountability Now." Among the demonstrators were civil rights activists who saw this as yet another example of systemic racism embedded within law enforcement practices. For years, communities of color had spoken out against officers abusing their power, only to be dismissed or ignored. Now Maya's case provided undeniable proof of the problem, one too egregious to sweep under the rug. While the public rallied behind Maya, she found herself grappling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, she appreciated the support pouring in from strangers who believed in her innocence. On the other hand, she felt overwhelmed by the sudden spotlight. Every comment, every article, every interview request reminded her of the humiliation she'd endured. At night, she lay awake replaying the events in her mind, wondering if things might have turned out differently if she hadn't spoken up. Her parents, desperate to protect their daughter, sought legal counsel immediately. They hired Rachel Monroe, a seasoned attorney known for her dedication to fighting injustice. Rachel listened intently as Maya recounted her side of the story, nodding sympathetically. "We're going to hold him accountable," Rachel promised, her voice firm yet comforting. "No one deserves to be treated like that." Meanwhile, investigators dug deeper into Hargrove's past, uncovering a troubling pattern of behavior. Complaints filed against him ranged from verbal abuse to physical intimidation, yet none had resulted in disciplinary action. It became clear that his actions weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a larger issue plaguing the department. And as more details emerged, so did the realization that justice for Maya wouldn't come easily. But despite the challenges ahead, Maya vowed to fight, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been mistreated simply because of who they were. The days following the incident at the courthouse felt surreal for Maya and her family. What had started as a routine trip to testify in a minor case quickly spiraled into something far bigger than anyone could have anticipated. The viral video of Officer Greg Hargrove handcuffing Maya spread like wildfire, igniting conversations not just locally, but across the country. Social media platforms buzzed with outrage, hashtags flooded timelines, and news outlets scrambled to cover the story from every angle. For Maya, however, the attention brought mixed emotions, gratitude for the support, but also an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. As protests erupted outside the courthouse, people carried signs bearing messages like "Justice for Maya" and "Stop Police Brutality." Families, activists, and concerned citizens gathered in solidarity, their voices echoing through the streets. Some even shared personal stories of similar encounters with law enforcement, revealing how widespread the issue truly was. One woman tearfully recounted how her teenage son had been stopped and searched without cause. Another described being pulled over repeatedly despite having no violations on record. These accounts painted a stark picture of systemic inequality, one that many hoped Maya's case would help dismantle. Inside the Johnson household, life became chaotic. Reporters camped outside their home, hoping to catch a glimpse of Maya or get a statement from her parents. Phone calls poured in from journalists, talk show hosts, and even strangers offering words of encouragement or criticism. While some praised Maya for standing up against injustice, others attacked her character online, accusing her of exaggerating the situation or seeking fame. Trolls left cruel comments beneath articles and videos, mocking her appearance or questioning why she couldn't just follow the rules. At just 16 years old, Maya found herself thrust into the center of a national debate, her name attached to both admiration and vitriol. Her parents did everything they could to shield her from the negativity. They turned off notifications on her phone, monitored her social media activity, and encouraged her to focus on schoolwork and hobbies. But it wasn't easy. Every time Maya opened her laptop or scrolled through her feed, she saw reminders of what had happened. She began withdrawing from friends, skipping basketball practice, and spending hours alone in her room drawing or writing poetry. Her grades slipped slightly, and teachers noticed a change in her demeanor. Once confident and full of energy, Maya now seemed hesitant, unsure of who to trust or where to turn. Despite the challenges, there were moments of hope. Civil rights organizations reached out to offer their support, vowing to stand by Maya throughout the legal process. Lawyers specializing in police misconduct offered pro bono assistance, while local community leaders organized fundraisers to help cover legal fees. Among those rallying behind Maya was State Senator Evelyn Carter, a prominent figure known for her advocacy work on behalf of marginalized communities. Senator Carter had been sitting in the courtroom that day, observing quietly from the sidelines until Hargrove's actions forced her to intervene. Senator Carter later revealed that she had spoken privately with court officials after witnessing the scene unfold. Though she hadn't stepped forward immediately, she described feeling a mix of anger and disbelief as she watched Hargrove manhandle Maya. "It was horrifying to see someone so young treated with such disregard," she told reporters during a press conference. "But what struck me most was how normalized this behavior has become. We can't let this continue." Her involvement added weight to the growing demand for accountability. As someone with influence and political clout, Senator Carter used her platform to amplify Maya's story, calling for an independent investigation into Hargrove's conduct. She also urged lawmakers to revisit policies governing police behavior, emphasizing the need for transparency and reform. Her words resonated deeply with the public, further fueling the movement sparked by Maya's ordeal. Meanwhile, internal affairs investigators delved into Hargrove's history, uncovering unsettling patterns. Dozens of complaints had been filed against him over the years, ranging from accusations of racial profiling to allegations of excessive force. Yet none had resulted in disciplinary action. Former colleagues described him as arrogant and dismissive, often brushing off concerns raised by civilians or fellow officers. In one instance, he reportedly threatened a colleague who questioned his methods, warning them to stay out of his business. These revelations painted a troubling portrait of a man who operated above the law, protected by a system that prioritized loyalty over justice. For Maya, learning about Hargrove's past only deepened her resolve. She realized that her experience wasn't isolated. It was part of a much larger problem. With the guidance of attorney Rachel Monroe, she began preparing for the long road ahead. Rachel assured her that holding Hargrove accountable wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. "This isn't just about you anymore," Rachel explained gently. "It's about sending a message that no one is above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it." Rachel's words gave Maya strength, but they also reminded her of the stakes. The trial would be emotionally draining, requiring her to relive the trauma of that day repeatedly. She'd have to face Hargrove in court, look him in the eye, and recount every painful detail. The thought terrified her, but she knew she couldn't back down. Too many people were counting on her, not just her family and friends, but countless others who saw themselves in her story. As weeks turned into months, Maya slowly began finding ways to cope. She joined a youth mentorship program aimed at empowering teens affected by systemic injustice, using her experience to inspire others. Through art therapy sessions, she channeled her emotions into paintings and sketches, creating vivid depictions of resilience and hope. And though she still struggled with anxiety and self-doubt, she found comfort in knowing she wasn't alone. Her community stood firmly beside her, ready to fight for change alongside her. By the time formal charges were announced against Hargrove, the momentum behind Maya's case had reached a fever pitch. Protesters continued marching, lawmakers drafted new legislation, and celebrities lent their voices to the cause. It seemed as though the entire nation was watching, waiting to see whether justice would finally prevail. For Maya, the journey was far from over, but for the first time she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. As the investigation into Officer Greg Hargrove's actions deepened, the layers of his troubling behavior began to unravel like threads pulled from an old sweater. What started as a single incident involving Maya Johnson soon revealed itself to be part of a much larger pattern, one that painted a grim picture of unchecked power and systemic failure within the police department. The internal affairs team assigned to review Hargrove's conduct pored over years' worth of records, testimonies, and complaints, uncovering details that shocked even seasoned investigators. One particularly damning piece of evidence came from a former colleague who had worked alongside Hargrove for nearly a decade. In a sworn statement, The officer described how Hargrove often bragged about his ability to handle situations without consequences. He recounted several instances where Hargrove used excessive force during routine traffic stops or public disturbances, targeting individuals based on their race or perceived attitude. He always said no one could touch him, the colleague recalled. And honestly, he was right. For years, nothing stuck. Another witness, a civilian named Marcus Reed, shared his own harrowing encounter with Hargrove. During a routine stop for a broken taillight, Reed, a black man in his early 30s, was pulled out of his car and thrown to the ground by Hargrove, who accused him of being disrespectful. When Reed protested, claiming he hadn't done anything wrong, Hargrove allegedly leaned in close and whispered, "You'll learn your place." Though Reed filed a formal complaint afterward, it disappeared into bureaucratic limbo, never resulting in any action against the officer. Stories like these weren't rare. They were alarmingly common, buried beneath layers of negligence and institutional protection. But what truly shifted the narrative and turned the case into a national reckoning was the involvement of State Senator Evelyn Carter. As someone with significant political influence, her testimony carried immense weight, both legally and symbolically. During interviews and public appearances, she didn't shy away from sharing her perspective on what she witnessed in the courtroom that day. Her account added a layer of complexity to the story, highlighting not only the abuse of power, but also the stark disparities in how authority figures treat different people. Senator Carter recounted how, after Hargrove handcuffed Maya and dragged her out of the room, he brushed past her chair while returning to his post. In doing so, he accidentally bumped her arm, a minor physical interaction that might have gone unnoticed under normal circumstances, but given the context, it took on new meaning. At first, Carter thought little of it, assuming it was unintentional. However, when Hargrove failed to apologize or acknowledge the contact, she realized it was emblematic of his broader disregard for boundaries and respect. This seemingly small detail became pivotal during the legal proceedings. Prosecutors argued that Hargrove's actions toward Senator Carter demonstrated a blatant lack of professionalism and decorum, especially considering her status as a public official. While the act itself wasn't violent or aggressive, it underscored his pattern of entitlement and arrogance, a clear indication that he believed himself untouchable. For many observers, this revelation highlighted the double standards at play. If Hargrove could treat a powerful senator with such casual disrespect, imagine how he treated those without privilege or connections. The decision to charge Hargrove with assault on a public official sent shockwaves through the community. Some hailed it as a long overdue step toward accountability, while others criticized it as selective justice. Critics pointed out the irony. Here was a man facing criminal charges not primarily for handcuffing a frightened teenager, but for brushing shoulders with someone influential. It raised uncomfortable questions about whose voices mattered most. In the fight for fairness and equality, wasn't Maya's suffering enough to warrant consequences? Or did systemic change require aligning with power to achieve results? For Maya, watching the legal strategy unfold was bittersweet. On one hand, she felt grateful that her story had gained traction and forced authorities to take action. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the painful truth that her voice alone might not have been enough. Attorney Rachel Monroe explained it to her gently. Sometimes progress required leveraging every available tool, even if it meant shining a spotlight on someone else's experience to drive the point home. "It doesn't diminish what happened to you," Rachel assured her. "It just means we're playing the game strategically." Despite the criticisms, the trial preparations moved forward with intense focus. Maya spent countless hours rehearsing her testimony, working closely with Rachel to ensure she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. They practiced answering difficult questions, anticipating defense tactics, and managing her emotions under pressure. Rachel reminded her repeatedly that her strength wasn't just in recounting facts, it was in showing the human impact of Hargrove's actions. "Let them see who you are," Rachel urged. "Let them feel what you felt." Meanwhile, the prosecution built its case meticulously, weaving together testimonies, evidence, and expert analysis to paint a comprehensive picture of Hargrove's misconduct. They called upon psychologists to discuss the psychological toll of such encounters on young victims, emphasizing how incidents like these could leave lasting scars. Community leaders testified about the broader implications of unchecked police brutality, framing the case as a turning point for reform. Even Senator Carter took the stand, delivering a poised yet impassioned account of her experience that left jurors visibly moved. Outside the courtroom, public interest remained high. Protesters continued gathering daily, holding vigils and rallies to keep the momentum alive. Social media campaigns amplified calls for justice, ensuring the story stayed in the headlines. Celebrities and activists lent their support, organizing fundraisers and awareness drives to sustain the movement. For Maya, seeing this outpouring of solidarity was both heartening and humbling. She often found herself overwhelmed by gratitude, knowing she wasn't fighting alone. Yet amidst all the noise, there were quieter moments of reflection. Maya spent evenings journaling, pouring her thoughts onto paper as a way to process everything she'd endured. Sometimes, she wrote letters to her future self, reminding her of the lessons learned and the resilience she discovered along the way. Other times, she sketched portraits of the people who inspired her: her parents, her lawyer, the activists standing shoulder to shoulder outside the courthouse. Each stroke of the pencil felt like reclaiming a piece of herself, rebuilding what Hargrove had tried to break. As the trial date approached, tensions ran high. Supporters gathered outside the courthouse each morning, chanting slogans and holding banners emblazoned with messages of hope and determination. Reporters camped out nearby, eager to capture every development. Inside, the atmosphere was equally charged, with lawyers strategizing furiously and witnesses preparing to take the stand. For Maya, stepping into the courtroom felt surreal. She recognized familiar faces in the crowd, friends, family, strangers, who had followed her journey, but also saw glimpses of doubt and skepticism among spectators. Would the jury believe her? Would justice prevail? Through it all, Maya clung to one unwavering belief: that telling the truth mattered. No matter how daunting the process or how imperfect the outcome, speaking up was a form of resistance. And as she sat in the witness box, ready to face Hargrove across the room, she reminded herself why she was there. Not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Whatever happened next, she knew she had already sparked something bigger than herself, a movement demanding change, one courageous step at a time. The day of the trial arrived, and the courthouse buzzed with anticipation. Outside, crowds gathered early in the morning, holding signs that read, "Justice for Maya," and "Accountability Matters." Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity, with reporters scribbling notes, cameras rolling discreetly, and spectators whispering anxiously. The air felt heavy with tension, as though everyone present knew they were witnessing something historic. For Maya Johnson, sitting quietly beside her attorney Rachel Monroe, the moment was surreal. She had spent months preparing for this day, rehearsing her testimony and steeling herself for what lay ahead. Yet nothing could fully prepare her for the reality of facing Officer Greg Hargrove across the room. When the judge entered and called the court to order, a hush fell over the crowd. Prosecutor Sarah Klein stood first, delivering an opening statement that painted a vivid picture of the events leading up to the trial. She described how Hargrove's actions weren't just an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of abuse and misconduct. Using evidence uncovered during the investigation, complaints filed against him, witness testimonies, and surveillance footage, she argued that Hargrove operated with impunity, believing himself untouchable. Her words resonated deeply with those in attendance, particularly when she turned to address the jury directly. "This isn't just about one girl being handcuffed in a courtroom," she said firmly. "It's about holding accountable those who abuse their power and ensuring that no one else has to endure what Maya did." Defense attorney Michael Torres countered with a starkly different narrative. He portrayed Hargrove as a dedicated officer, simply doing his job under challenging circumstances. According to Torres, Maya had been uncooperative and disruptive, leaving Hargrove with no choice but to restrain her. He dismissed accusations of racial bias, claiming they were baseless attempts to vilify a hardworking public servant. His tone was calm yet persuasive, designed to cast doubt on the prosecution's case while appealing to jurors' sense of fairness. It was a calculated strategy aimed at shifting focus away from Hargrove's behavior and onto Maya's alleged defiance. As the trial progressed, witnesses took the stand one by one, each adding pieces to the puzzle. First came Maya herself, seated nervously in the witness box. Under Rachel's guidance, she recounted the events of that fateful day in painstaking detail. Her voice trembled at times, especially when describing how Hargrove grabbed her arm and snapped the handcuffs around her wrists. But despite her fear, she remained composed, meeting the eyes of the jurors as she spoke. When asked why she hadn't resisted or fought back, she replied softly, "I didn't think I could. He was bigger than me, stronger than me, and he had all the power." Her testimony struck a chord with many in the room, including some members of the jury, whose expressions softened as they listened. Even skeptics found it difficult to dismiss the sincerity in her words. Prosecutor Klein followed up with pointed questions designed to highlight inconsistencies in Hargrove's version of events. "Did you ever raise your voice?" she asked. "Did you threaten anyone?" Each answer reinforced the image of a frightened teenager caught in an unimaginable situation. Next, State Senator Evelyn Carter took the stand, drawing rapt attention from the gallery. Dressed impeccably and speaking with quiet authority, she recounted her own experience in the courtroom that day. Though brief, her interaction with Hargrove carried symbolic weight. She explained how his careless bump and subsequent refusal to apologize spoke volumes about his attitude toward authority figures. "It wasn't just about me," she clarified. "It was about respect, or rather, the lack thereof. If someone in my position can be treated so casually, imagine how others without privilege are handled." Hargrove's defense team worked tirelessly to undermine these accounts, questioning motives and credibility. They suggested that Carter exaggerated her role in the incident to gain political capital, even implying that Maya's family orchestrated the media frenzy for personal gain. These tactics drew murmurs of disapproval from the audience, but Torres pressed on, determined to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of the jurors. One of the most compelling moments came when psychologist Dr. Lisa Bennett testified about the psychological impact of such encounters on young victims. Drawing on years of research, she explained how traumatic experiences like Maya's could lead to anxiety, depression, and trust issues later in life. Children are especially vulnerable, she emphasized. When someone in uniform abuses their power, it sends a message that authority cannot be trusted. That's devastating for a child trying to make sense of the world. Her testimony added emotional depth to the proceedings, reminding everyone of the human cost behind the legal arguments. As she spoke, Maya's mother dabbed tears from her eyes, clutching her husband's hand tightly. Even some jurors appeared visibly moved, nodding along as Dr. Bennett outlined the long-term consequences of unchecked abuse. Throughout the trial, Hargrove maintained a stoic demeanor, rarely showing emotion. When called to testify, he stuck to his script, insisting that his actions were justified and necessary. But cracks began to show under cross-examination. Prosecutor Klein skillfully dissected his story, pointing out contradictions between his account and the video evidence. At one point, she asked bluntly, "Why did you handcuff a 16-year-old girl for asking to sit closer to her family? Was that really necessary?" Hargrove hesitated before responding, his confidence wavering slightly. It was a small victory, but one that didn't go unnoticed. Closing arguments brought the trial to its climax. Prosecutor Klein delivered a passionate plea for justice, urging the jury to see beyond the technicalities and focus on the bigger picture. "This is your chance to say enough is enough," she declared, "to send a message that we won't tolerate abuse of power, no matter who wields it." Defense attorney Torres countered with a final appeal to reason, cautioning against rushing to judgment based on emotion rather than facts. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict, guilty on both counts of excessive force and assault on a public official. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the foreman read the decision aloud. Maya sat frozen in her seat, barely able to process what had happened. Tears streamed down her face as her parents hugged her tightly, whispering words of pride and relief. Outside, cheers erupted from the crowd, celebrations breaking out spontaneously as news of the verdict spread. For Maya, the moment was bittersweet. While she felt vindicated, she couldn't shake the knowledge that the fight wasn't truly over. True accountability meant more than punishing one man. It meant dismantling the systems that allowed people like Hargrove to thrive unchecked. Still, as she stepped out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight surrounded by supporters chanting her name, she allowed herself a rare smile. Justice might not be perfect, but it was a start. And sometimes, starting was the hardest part. The guilty verdict against Officer Greg Hargrove marked a turning point, not just for Maya Johnson, but for the entire community. For weeks after the trial, conversations about accountability, justice, and systemic reform dominated dinner tables, classrooms, and town hall meetings. People who had once felt powerless now dared to hope that change was possible. While the sentence of 5 years in prison may not have seemed like enough to some, it carried immense symbolic weight. It proved that even those in positions of authority could be held responsible for their actions. A rare yet crucial step toward rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the communities they served. For Maya, life slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy. The media frenzy died down, reporters stopped camping outside her house, and she could walk through the halls of her high school without being recognized as that girl from the courthouse. Yet the scars of the experience lingered. She still flinched when strangers approached her too quickly or raised their voices unexpectedly. Nights were often restless, filled with dreams where she relived the moment Hargrove grabbed her arm. But amidst the lingering trauma, there was also growth. Maya discovered a resilience within herself that she hadn't known existed. She realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to move forward despite it. With time, Maya found solace in using her voice to inspire others. Encouraged by her parents and attorney Rachel Monroe, she accepted invitations to speak at schools, community centers, and rallies. At first, public speaking terrified her. Standing behind a podium facing audiences that sometimes numbered in the hundreds brought back memories of testifying in court. But as she shared her story, how she felt humiliated, scared, and ultimately empowered to fight back, she saw something remarkable happen. People listened. They nodded along, clapped enthusiastically, and approached her afterward to share their own experiences. Many told her how her bravery gave them the strength to speak out about injustices they'd faced, but kept silent about for years. One particularly memorable event took place at a youth mentorship program called Voices Unite, which Maya had joined shortly after the trial. The organization focused on empowering teenagers affected by systemic inequality, offering workshops, counseling, and leadership training. During one session, Maya led a group activity where participants created art pieces inspired by their personal struggles. A 14-year-old boy named Jamal stood up to present his drawing, a pair of handcuffs breaking apart surrounded by bright rays of sunlight. "This is what your story means to me," he said shyly. "It shows us that we can break free from the things that hold us down." His words brought tears to Maya's eyes, reminding her why she continued to share her journey despite the pain it sometimes stirred. As Maya grew into her role as an advocate, she collaborated closely with State Senator Evelyn Carter, who remained deeply committed to addressing the issues highlighted by the case. Together, they drafted legislation aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within law enforcement agencies. Dubbed the Maya Act, the bill proposed several key reforms: mandatory body cameras for all officers, independent oversight boards to investigate misconduct, and stricter penalties for violations of civil rights. Though passing the bill required navigating political obstacles and overcoming resistance from powerful lobbying groups, its introduction alone sent a powerful message. Lawmakers across the country began introducing similar measures, citing Maya's case as a catalyst for change. Public support played a critical role in keeping the momentum alive. Activists organized marches, petitions, and social media campaigns to pressure legislators into action. Celebrities amplified the cause, sharing videos and posts urging fans to contact their representatives. Even corporations pledged financial backing for organizations working to combat systemic racism and police brutality. What started as a single incident in a small-town courthouse had blossomed into a nationwide movement, one driven by ordinary people demanding extraordinary change. Despite the progress, Maya understood that true transformation would take time. Reforms couldn't erase centuries of inequality overnight, nor could new laws guarantee that every officer would act with integrity. Change required more than policy updates. It demanded shifts in mindset, culture, and education. To address this, Maya partnered with educators to develop curriculum modules teaching students about civic responsibility, empathy, and the importance of standing up against injustice. She believed that fostering understanding at a young age could prevent future generations from repeating the mistakes of the past. Her efforts extended beyond activism and advocacy. Art became a cornerstone of her healing process, allowing her to express emotions too complex for words. She painted murals in her neighborhood, depicting themes of unity and resilience, each stroke a testament to her journey. One mural, located near the courthouse where everything began, featured a young girl breaking free from chains while reaching toward a glowing horizon. Beneath it, Maya wrote a simple yet profound message. Courage starts with telling the truth. Though Maya's story inspired countless others, she never lost sight of her own humanity. There were days when self-doubt crept in, whispering that she wasn't strong enough or smart enough to make a difference. On those days, she leaned on her support system, her family, friends, mentors, and fellow activists. Her parents reminded her that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. Rachel Monroe encouraged her to celebrate small victories, whether it was convincing one person to care or helping pass a local resolution. And Senator Carter often told her, "You're planting seeds, Maya. Not every tree will grow immediately, but the forest is already taking shape." By the one-year anniversary of the trial, Maya's impact was undeniable. The Maya Act had passed in several states, sparking debates and inspiring further reforms nationwide. Schools incorporated her artwork and teachings into their programs, ensuring her message reached corners of the country she'd never visited. Social media hashtags like "Break the Chains" and "Truth to Power" trended regularly, fueled by stories of individuals challenging injustice in their own communities. Protesters marched under banners bearing her name, carrying forward the torch she'd lit. Yet Maya refused to see herself as a hero. In interviews, she consistently redirected praise to the collective effort driving the movement. "I'm just one person," she often said. "Change happens because so many of us are willing to stand together and say, 'This isn't right.'" Her humility only endeared her more to those who followed her journey, proving that authenticity resonated far louder than any grandiose claims. Looking ahead, Maya dreamed of continuing her education and pursuing a career in law or public policy. She envisioned a future where systems worked for everyone, not just the privileged few. Until then, she vowed to keep fighting, not out of anger or bitterness, but out of love for a world she believed could be better. As she stood before another, crowd microphone in hand, ready to share her story once again, she felt a quiet sense of peace. She might not have chosen the path she walked, but she embraced it fully, knowing it had the power to light the way for others. And so, Maya Johnson's legacy grew, not as a symbol of victimhood, but as a beacon of hope. Her courage reminded people that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one voice could spark a revolution, one truth could shatter silence, one step could lead to miles of progress.